Welcome back to the Take Your Life Back Summit, your roadmap out of chronic pain, fatigue, and autoimmune disorders. And I'm your host, Dr. Heather Yost. I'm so excited to announce today's special guest, Dr. Terry Wahls. Dr. Wahls is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she conducts clinical trials. She is also a patient with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt-recline wheelchair for 4 years. Dr. Wahls restored her health using a diet and lifestyle program she designed specifically for her brain, and now, I love this, pedals her bike to work each day. She is the author of the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine, the Wahls Protocol, a radical new way to treat all chronic autoimmune conditions using paleo principles, and the cookbook, the Wahls Protocol, Cooking for Life, the revolutionary modern paleo plan to treat all chronic autoimmune disorders. I know how busy you are. You've got this cookbook coming out on April 3rd, and I just want to make sure I make a note that how important it is to me, or special it is that you're here today, because you are spinning a lot of plates and doing a lot of things and have a lot of great things coming up for our listeners. Yeah. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I love talking about these issues to people with autoimmunes, because we've been suffering, all of us, for a very long time.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Sure. So, I'm an academic internal medicine doc, and for years I thought people who are into vitamins and supplements and alternative medicine were wasting the money. I was very, very skeptical. But God works in mysterious ways. In 2000, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and I knew that within 10 years, half people aren't able to work due to severe fatigue. And so I decided to treat my disease very aggressively. I sought out the best center I could find doing research here in the Midwest. That was the Cleveland Clinic. I saw the best people, took the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, my disease had transitioned to secondary progressive MS. I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair. I took mitoxantrone, and then when it became available, I took Tysabri, that modern new biologic drug. But all through this whole time, I continued to decline. And the good news is that when I hit the wheelchair, I decided that conventional medicine was not going to stop this slide into a bedridden and possibly demented life. I was also having progressively worse pain that was getting more and more difficult to control. And so that's when I began to read and experiment on myself. And in this journey, I would, based on what I learned through the ancestral health movement, through my own research, and through functional medicine, I would create a diet and lifestyle program that, once I implemented that, had really a breathtaking speed of recovery. Within 3 months, my mental fatigue was eliminated. My mental alertness was greatly improved. At the end of 3 months, I was beginning to walk with a cane. At 6 months, I was walking without a cane, still limping, mind you, but I'm walking without a cane. At 9 months, I get on my bike for the first time and bike around the block. I'm crying, my kids are crying, my wife's crying, because this is when hope got back into my life, because I had completely accepted that progressive MS is only progressive, and I coped by taking one day at a time. So even though I had recovered quite dramatically, I was still taking one day at a time, had no hope, knew I had a progressive illness, and didn't really know what to make of these dramatic changes. But when I rode my bike, I knew that the conventional understanding of progressive MS was incomplete, that my physicians nor I had any idea what might be possible, and that in fact I might be able to recover to a surprising degree. Then just 3 months later, I do a 18-mile bike ride with my family. And now I'm rocking on hope, and I have changed how I practice medicine. I'm not really talking much about drugs anymore. I'm talking about diet and lifestyle and all the things that we under our control that we can do. And it would ultimately change the focus of my research and my professional life entirely. And so now I'm running around the world trying to let everyone know that if I can come back from being so ill when I could not even sit up in a regular chair like I am today, to being able to bike to work, write research grants, write books, travel the world, give lectures, there's a very good possibility that they too could stop their decline and experience improvement. I don't know how much, but it's certainly worth eating some kale to find out.
Yeah, what do you have to lose? I mean,
Yeah.
that is, your story is so empowering. And I have to tell you, the first time that I read your story, I just got goosebumps. I mean, I come from a family of bikers, so I understand.
Oh, you can well guess.
Yeah, the importance of being able to do the things. I mean, we all want to feel good, but we want to do the things that are important to us. When you started digging into your research and trying to get, if I may say, to the root cause of what was happening to you while declining, what did you find in your research?
Well, at first, ironically, when I started reading the research, I'm looking for fancy new drugs. Fortunately, I had an aha moment, like, well, that's a waste. I can't get to these drugs, and they aren't helping. Then I started looking for vitamins, nutrition. There wasn't much about MS, so I switched over to other shrinking brain diseases: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's, Huntington's disease. And so, ironically, my protocol is really designed initially around neurodegeneration and mitochondria. I had this theory that since MS has shrinking brains as well, mitochondria is probably at the root cause of the problem for MS. That inflammation's somewhat of a problem, but the biggest problem is neurodegeneration because of mitochondrial strain. My vitamin supplement cocktail was targeting the mitochondria. Then when I took my functional medicine course and deepened my understanding a bit more, now instead of having just like 7 supplements, I went to 20. Did that. There wasn't a dramatic change, but I had another aha moment, like, I should figure this out in the food supply. And I'm going to back up for a moment. Earlier, when I was first diagnosed in 2000, I'd been a vegetarian 20 years. At 2002, my Cleveland Clinic doctors told me about the work of Lauren Cordain in the paleo diet. So after a lot of prayer and meditation, I went back to eating meat. Gave up all grain, all legumes, all dairy. Big change. But I continued to decline. I needed the wheelchair, needed chemotherapy. So the paleo diet did not fix me. Supplements didn't fix me. But when I combined what I learned from my research about mitochondria, from functional medicine, from the ancestral health movement, and said, I got to do this with food, that's when the magic began. So supplements are tough. They need to be targeted. You have to be careful about ratios. It is a much more complicated circumstance. In food, we get everything in the right ratios, the way our ancestors have been having probably for thousands of generations. And so I think it does things in a much more comprehensive way than we can get whenever we just use the supplements. So food first, lifestyle next, also very important. Targeted supplements where you really think carefully and do some monitoring.
I am so glad that you said that. I think so many people hear maybe, oh, magnesium is good for headaches, for example, and then go to the health food store, pick up any magnesium off a shelf, or maybe even head to, say, Costco. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but just saying, like, to major supermarkets and buy things in bulk, hoping that it's going to help them. When in all reality, we need to understand that just over the counter doesn't necessarily mean safe or effective. They need to be targeted.
I talk to folks like zinc is a great example. Zinc's a very important cofactor in enzymes in my brain, in my immune cells. Many people are depleted in zinc, and they hear about that, and so they go get their zinc supplement and start, and they can tell, like, oh my gosh, it is doing something great for me. And it does something great for quite a while, but because zinc and copper are taken up by the same receptor in your cells, if you keep taking all this extra zinc, you'll eventually block the copper uptakes, and you'll create copper deficiency. Well, copper is also a very important cofactor in our brains and in our immune cells. And so eventually we go from being zinc depleted to zinc sufficient. We're feeling really great. Then we become zinc toxic and copper depleted. And we have a different set of health problems that come on very gradually. And it's very hard to have any insight into what was the root cause, which was the introduction of a supplement that wasn't carefully monitored.
Right. Great point. When you started doing all of this research and thus changed the things you were doing for your own health, you mentioned earlier that it really changed your scope of practice.
Oh my goodness, yes.
How did it change? What did you do differently?
Okay, so very interesting story. As I said, God works in mysterious ways. In July, as I was going downhill, so July 2007, my chief of staff had called me in to say, Terry, I'm going to assign you to the traumatic brain injury clinic. You'll start seeing patients without residents, part of a multidisciplinary team of about 20 minutes. It's going to be no residents. So I'm in a wheelchair. I can't sit up. I'm like, yeah, there's no way I can do this job. But of course, I smile and say, well, thanks. Thank you, John. I'll be glad to do that. And I go home and tell my wife. And we know that this is really the VA's way of saying, look, Terry, you're going to have to take medical disability. It's time. And I said, well, what you do is we go to clinic that day, and either I can do the job or I can't. Well, it turns out that summer, I discovered the Institute of Functional Medicine. And I integrate all of this stuff over the summer and fall. And so by December, I have this new program that's designed very specifically for my brain. I've changed my diet in a very specific way for my brain. In December 26th is the first day we have this new way of eating. And so by, I think it's about January 20th that I went off to the traumatic brain injury clinic. And the first week, I'm just watching my partners run the clinic. So that's pretty easy. I'm in my short recline wheelchair. The next week, I'm supposed to get up and start seeing patients. And by God, turns out I can stand up, do an exam, sit down, do my notes. And, I'm able to do that. At the end of the clinic, I'm like, well, I don't feel too bad. And so at the end of the next week, I'm like, well, this seems to be working. And so by the end of January, my wife and I realized that, I probably can do this clinic. And at that point, everyone in the clinic is focused on, there's nothing we can do for traumatic brain injury. We'll just give you psych drugs as needed and see how much recovery happens. But as I start recovering, I begin to okay, wait a minute, guys. There's a lot we can do here. And I start talking about diet. I start talking about B vitamins, fish oil, some very targeted supplements. I talk about meditation and exercise. And so you can tell the vets that I see are excited about the hope, the possibilities, and they're really doing quite a bit better. My physician partners are very uncomfortable. They're complaining to the chief of staff like I'm doing all this stuff and there's no FDA approval. I'm not doing guideline, standard of care. So I get hauled down and I have some conversation with my chief of staff. I bring down my scientific papers. We go over the rationale, the science behind my recommendations. We agree to some language changes, so I'm very careful to not use, to talk only about improving the health of your cells. Mm-hmm. To make no claims, I'm very, very careful, improving the health of your cells, giving your brain better building blocks. And then my chief of staff becomes a huge fan, and he says, look, if she hurts someone, we'll do a peer review and we'll figure it out. If she doesn't hurt anyone, you got to back off. She's got plenty of science. If she starts making claims, let me know. She can't do that. But she can talk about brain health. She can talk about building blocks. She can talk about vegetables. She can give B vitamins. And so I had to learn the correct language that was going to fly in my environment. Right. And when I spoke with the residents, I was very careful to talk about biochemistry, physiology, and again, be very careful about not making claims, but just talk about physiology. And so then in my primary care clinics, the same kind of thing happened. I'm not talking about drugs anymore. I'm talking about biochemistry, physiology. The residents think okay, we're going to talk about the newest drug. And then I'm talking about the pathways that are influenced by the various phytochemicals in plants. And they're sort of shocked. And the residents begin to see how I get patients fired up about diet and lifestyle and doing this as an experiment. So I'd say by the end of 2008, I've been ruined as a primary care doc. I'm no longer talking about drugs. I'm talking about food. I'm asking people about their eating patterns. I'm asking about toxin exposures. And we are solely down diet, lifestyle, physiology, and biochemistry. And the residents in our clinic, you can either go, there's two of us, two docs side by side, and there's one doc who's doing the drug conversation. And I'm doing the biochemistry, phytochemical, plant conversation. And so the residents are sort of staffing back and forth between the two of us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How cool is that? So what would you say are the key parts of your dietary plan?
Well, so I'll sort of back up. Now, people have to remember that I'd already removed gluten, so all the grains, all the legumes, and all the dairy. So I'd already gone gluten and dairy free. I was still eating eggs. I was still eating some nightshades, although I had gone nightshade free for several years without any particular benefit. And I had meat and vegetables. But what I did that was so remarkable was I switched it to a little meat and an enormous amount of vegetables because I was really chasing those phytochemicals. And I chased them in a very particular way. So green leafy vegetables, kale, collards, spinach, Swiss chard, leafy greens, 3 cups, a plate full of that. A plate full of what I call the sulfur-rich vegetables. And I was very particular about the categories, cabbage, onion, mushroom families, because they help boost detox enzymes, boost the production of gamma-aminobutyric acid. So they do some great things for the brain. They also improve blood vessel and blood flow, and they improve nerve growth, hormone production in the brain. So some great things there. Then the third category had to do with the antioxidants, the polyphenols. Those are things that are colored all the way through. And again, I learned to make things very teachable and memorable and simple for my patients. So to figure out if something colored, you take a knife and you cut it all the way through. And then you open it up. Is it colored all the way through? It's colored. So beets, carrots, berries, peaches, apricots are colored. Bananas, pears, apples are not. You can have them, but you get to have those foods after you've had 9 cups of the other stuff. 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of sulfur, 3 cups of color. And yeah, I'm a big, tall lady, 6 foot tall. My clinical practice was mostly men at the VA. For petite women, you don't stuff yourself. Eat proportionally what you can in those 3 categories.
Very great. So one more time, 3 cups greens, 3 cups sulfur, 3 cups
color.
And after that, you can play around with it a little bit.
You can play around. And the beauty of doing it, and I taught it this way at the VA very intentionally because I didn't want people to be hungry.
Right.
I wanted to crowd out the bad food. So in my traumatic brain injury clinic and in my autoimmune clinic, the first message was 9 cups of vegetables every day. And I didn't worry about gluten-free or dairy-free. I ramped up the vegetables. And then we would go gluten-free, dairy-free. In my clinical trials and in my lifestyle clinic where I'm treating autoimmunity, then I asked them to do gluten-free, dairy-free immediately. But, my traumatic brain injury clinic, in my diabetes patients, I just do the 9 cups of vegetables first. But if there's any autoimmunity, I take out gluten. And now I'd also say if there's neurodegeneration, I take out the gluten as well.
I like that you said 9 cups of vegetables are going to crowd out the bad stuff. I think you make a really valid point. It's so much easier to add something in and take things away because we're so fearful that diet or lifestyle or dietary changes mean that we're going to suffer, like we're going to lose things.
Correct. So I would tell people, no bread, no grain, no potatoes till you've had your 9 cups. They're like, right. What do I have for breakfast? I said, well, have breakfast in the evening then.
Right.
Just flip it on its head. And the other thing I remind people is, this is an experiment. You've been suffering for a very long time. And many folks, they've been suffering for decades. And so I challenge them that uh, my patients, when I was at the VA, they've been through war. Like, sir, ma'am, you've done things far harder than 100 days of a diet you don't particularly like. At the end of the 100 days, you can decide what you want to do with that. And have you been able to find more fun foods to eat? Now, we did learn when I got invited. So the men and women that I saw when I was still at the VA, I would tell them, look, you've been through war, you've been through the military, you've done things far, far harder than learning how to eat new food. And this is simply an experiment. I advocate for 100 days at 100% because it's easy to remember 100 and 100. In my traumatic brain injury clinic, I would sort of negotiate with what they're willing to do, and whatever they're willing to do is what they're willing to do. To work with me in my lifestyle clinic, they had to commit to 100 days for 100%. To be in my clinical trial, you have to commit to, you're going to do the program for the duration of the clinical trial. But I'm also really very mindful of motivational interviewing. Patients are either pre-contemplative, like, this is not for me at this point in my life.
Right.
Contemplative, I could begin to experiment, perhaps work individually with a nutritionist or a health coach to make some changes more gradually. Or, I believe you, I'm inspired, I'm hopeful, I'm ready for action. I will dive in with you and do this journey with you, and I'm so excited. Those people would come in, commit, and we would just see stunning transformation. But in that, we learned a very helpful tool was our cooking classes to help them learn how to cook. And we had to teach them how to make simple things that don't have a lot of ingredients, you can do when you're tired, don't take. The people that I served, most of them were on disability. They didn't have money. They weren't buying grass-fed organic, wild-caught, because they were lucky if they could get groceries. Right. So I'm working, and they taught me that I had to figure out how to live with that reality. So we talk about food waste, we talk about menus, we talk about making plans, we talk about learning how to have sort of a template for your recipe, and then you improvise based on what you have on hand or what's seasonally available or what you can afford. So they taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about how to make this doable for people who are ill.
I love that you said that, and it's crazy cool to think that, I guess what I want to say is that the audience has to know that wherever you're at financially, what you just said tells them it can be done. You do not need to eat everything organic to start a healing journey.
Correct. Most of the folks in my clinic did not get organic food. They're getting canned food. They're still eating a lot of potatoes because the potatoes were inexpensive, unless they had rheumatoid arthritis. Those folks, I got off the potatoes. But we started out with the food they could afford. We helped them make menus. If people couldn't afford meat, and I had folks who couldn't or were spiritually opposed to meat, we told them how to do this as a vegetarian and to have meatless meals. And so this wasn't the perfect, perfect diet that you hear about. But it was still a very practical diet people could afford. They could make it work. They were saving money, and they were getting better.
Right. Practical, workable dietary changes. And if we think about how much people, a Starbucks, stop drinking your one.
Well, that's the other thing that I learned I had to do was I had to teach people, what is your food budget? Your food budget is the grocery bill, the fast food, the Starbucks, the alcohol, the tobacco, the candy, everything you're buying that goes into your mouth. The bottled water, the sodas, the cookies, the snacks. So keep track of all of that. And the first thing to do is to stop buying foods that are killing your brain cells. So we work on that. And planning is a skill. Learning how to do that, how to make a plan, a menu, use some recipes, make shopping lists. These are all new skills for many, many of our folks. But when they learn how to do that, They often saved a fair amount of money. And then the other thing that was really very interesting was that as people began to recover, and of course we had our support groups, sort of mixed, people who were experienced, people who were new, people would begin to figure out how to get higher and higher quality food. So they'd go from canned to frozen to seasonal and fresh, and then they'd start figuring out how to forage, where they could go to the farmer's market and get food that had fewer pesticide residues, and get some game, do some hunting, fishing, and people began to figure out how to get often even organic food.
So just to repeat for the listener, is getting healthy can actually help you save money, not cost you money necessarily. And I had a speaker say that it's self-love that's missing, but we disguise it as time and money. And I thought so you connect those points. Yeah, you connect those points so beautifully, meaning that it doesn't necessarily have to cost more money, and your clinical trials are proof of that.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing I want to be mindful is, so we have people are at both extremes. We are pressed immensely for either money or time or both. So we had people in our clinic who were on disability and really struggling. And then we have other people who are still professionals, but kids, and they are immensely pressed, not for money, but for time. And so it's a similar kind of struggle that you have to help both sets of people figure out. It still requires some planning and to help them learn that you can make food in less time than it takes to put in a frozen pizza. You can make great food for yourself in less time.
Right. Awesome. I wondered if we could dive in a little bit to the connection between the microbiome and what that is, and autoimmune disorders.
Sure. When I first had my own healing journey, I figured I was getting better through micronutrient triage theory from Dr. Ames. And then I thought it was the shift in the gene expression from Randy Hurdle's work. And those are very important factors. But now I think perhaps the biggest driver might be the change in the microbiome. You and I have about 25,000 genes, and we thought we'd have about 100,000 genes, so we're missing about 75,000 genes. We could never figure out where they went. Which is pretty amazing. You see, we have in our gut living about 1,000 trillion viruses, 100 trillion bacteria, and some yeast, and a few single-cell parasites in there as well. And we have about 1,000 trillion cells, or probably about 1 trillion cells ourselves. So we're outnumbered by bacteria 100 to 1, and by viruses 1,000 to 1. And if you look at the total genes that we have, we're like 1% human and 99% other genes, which is really quite stunning to think about that. And that's been critical to our health. And let me sort of explain that. So if you go back, thousands of generations, we'll do my family tree, that there was a mutation that occurred, and that was an important mutation for making some key protein for my brain. And without that protein, I'm going to be dement. I just couldn't make it into puberty. But it turned out that when that happened, my mom still had the bacteria in her bowels that made the precursors for that protein, so that protein could still get made. And so reproductive success happened, and that lineage continued on, and I would ultimately be born. But at that moment, that's the moment when that gene got exported from my DNA, my ancestor's DNA, into my ancestor mother's human gut microbiome. So when we thought we needed 100,000 genes to run our chemistry of life, we almost certainly do need those 100,000 genes. 25,000 of them are still in our DNA. The other 75,000 are living in the bacteria and viruses that live in us. And as long as they're around, all of our chemistry is going to work really well. But if we start messing up with our microbiome because we're taking a lot of antibiotics, we're eating a lot of sugar, a lot of white flour, we fertilize the wrong bacteria, the wrong yeast. We lose out the bacteria, viruses, and yeast that had been part of making sure that missing 75,000 genes were working well, and then our health declines. So it's really important for how we run our chemistry. There's other ways I could talk about. If you get the wrong mix, you get a leaky gut, and it lets bacterial particles into our bloodstream, which really revs up the inflammation. We also know that this early leaky gut from having the wrong mix of bacteria in your bowels is now being thought as the very first step of starting that autoantibody sequence that would eventually develop into an autoimmune problem, which would eventually then be diagnosed as to a specific autoimmune diagnosis. Yeah, and I'd say every week there are relevant microbiome papers that are coming out that my partners and I are talking about. So the state of knowledge is changing very rapidly, and there are more and more disease states that we're saying, yes, clearly there's a different altered microbiome associated with this disease.
And you can correct this.
We can correct this. And I think that is why the Wahls protocol is so powerful. I love the paleo diet, but I have to remind my paleo friends, it didn't fix me. It does not fix everyone. If you're not too well, it might fix you. But if you're really pretty ill, you're going to need a whole lot more than just the paleo diet. In that, what I did was I designed a diet very specifically that appears, because I was so heavy on the vegetables, that I am fertilizing these ancient bacteria that were part of our gut microbiome for those thousands of generations and are now flourishing again.
Right. I would like to, just because I want to make sure that we have time for it, I want to tell our listeners exactly how do they get to this, because they're going to be wondering, well, I want to learn more about this Wahls protocol. And I know your cookbook will be out by the time they're listening to this. So how do they find it?
So we have lots. I've learned to make lots and lots of tools so people can get the level of support that they need.
Right.
So the cookbook will be out April 4th. I'll have links to that on my website. And if you get it through my website, the beauty of that is you'll also get to have some additional content that we're offering as additional tools to help you get started. And there'll be some really fun videos that you'll see there from me as well. So get it to my website. I would also pick up my book, The Wahls Protocol, either in paperback or hardback, because it's about more than just food. So that would be helpful. And then we get so many people asking for more support than you can get from the book.
Right.
And so over time, we've created a variety of tools to make it easier. We have a membership site for lots more education. We have a year's worth of recipes at all 3 levels, so that can be very good. I have a in-person seminar that happens every August where people can come and get intensive education. We're going to have a great time this year doing a lot of experiences and teaching people, these big skills like menu making, shopping list. We'll talk about the pulse test to help understand your food sensitivities, some detox strategies, stress reduction strategies. So there'll be a lot of information, a lot of skill building. We'll also have a practitioner day for our clinicians, and we are certifying health professionals as well. And then the other thing, people have also been calling me for years trying to get into my clinical practice. I've recently retired from the VA, so I'm half-time at the U. I spend a bunch of time with my seminar and teaching the public, and I'll be opening up a couple days of part-time clinical practice. So if people sign up on my newsletter, I will be sending out a notice for some opportunities to see me privately. So sign up for my newsletter. That'll be coming out, and they'll be starting that this summer as well.
Awesome. Very good. And I just want to encourage everybody to take advantage of the free gift also that you're giving. That URL is right on the email that got you to this interview. Before we have to close up as the time is coming down, can you tell us just for fun, like if we were going to open up your refrigerator, what would be 2 things that we would find every single time in your refrigerator?
Well, you're always going to find lots of greens. And that's seasonally appropriate. The other thing you'll find is fermented foods. So I have kombucha that I've got on my counter that I ferment all the time. We like beet kvass, which is a fermented beet beverage. And I always have some sort of fermented vegetables. Those you'll always see.
What about sorry, go ahead.
And you'll probably always see some organ meat in the freezer as well.
Very good. What about if you're stuck on a deserted island? What 2 products would you make sure to have with you? Products or supplements?
Well, I know that my enzymes for handling B12 are very inefficient. And so I have to take high-dose B12 to keep my homocysteine normal. So I'll be taking that with me.
Right. Very, very good.
And if I'm on a desert island, I guess I probably won't need vitamin D, so I can leave that one behind.
Right.
And I would probably, because I'm aging, I would take N-acetylcysteine to help make sure I'm getting good glutathione support.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Wahls. It's been just an honor to spend time with you, to learn more about you, to hear your story alone, I think is so motivational and inspirational. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. Well, that's our segment for today of the Take Your Life Back Summit. Make sure to watch your email tomorrow because there's going to be another great expert and a lot more information coming your way, and I want to make sure you don't miss it. This is the Take Your Life Back Summit. Dr. Heather Yost. Take care, be well, and we'll see you tomorrow.